May I have a roll call for the Golf Club Board of Directors, please?
Director Listner.
Here.
Director Miller.
Here.
Director Mulvaney. Here. Director Thomas. Here. Director Turner.
Here.
Director Vree.
Here.
All right. Is there anyone in the public that wishes to address the Golf Club Directors? All right. If not, Stella, could you tell us about the budget for fiscal year 2020?
Yes, I can. Thank you, and good evening. You did receive the budget documents. Over the past 3 months, the Golf Advisory Committee has reviewed the budget in quite a bit of detail, including our capital plan for next year. The budget for this year turned out to be pretty good despite the weather. We are looking to have a positive NOI of $280,000. That's our projection. A lot better than we anticipated. Given this is the first year that we are paying the Cook County Forest Preserve their full amount in fee, which is 3.6 of gross, or 62.5. So this year we're paying from last year. So last year we had a pretty good year, so we paid them 65,830 and our normal expenses. So if you figure in that payment, we had a pretty good year, which is just evidence that we went through the county agreement pretty well and knew that we would be able to pay them and still be efficient and run the golf course as best we can, because we also put in this year about $290,000 in capital improvement back into the golf course. So it was a pretty good year financially, although we could have been a lot better if the weather cooperated. Looking into next year, there are no really significant changes. We do anticipate $310 in our capital. That's including $50,000 we have earmarked for clubhouse project if we go to that point. Through last year, or the fiscal year that we're in, we have invested $3 million back into the golf club from all of the funds that the golf course has generated itself. So there is no other monies involved in this investment. Everything that gets invested back into the golf club is from revenue that is generated from the golf club. And next year we are looking to have a positive NOI of about $117,000, and again investing about $310 in capital. Any questions?
Any questions for Stella about the budget?
Our typical revenue is about 1.74, 1.77, somewhere in that range. We have been, it fluctuates depending on our need. We do have a 20-year capital plan. A majority of the money that we have next year is part of our equipment rotation. So we have about $90,000 just for new equipment, and by new I mean new used equipment. Majority of our equipment we purchase used.
Other questions? If not, may I have a motion to approve the budget?
I so move.
Second?
May I have a roll call, please?
Director Listner.
Yes.
Director Miller.
Yes.
Director Mulvaney.
Yes.
Director Thomas.
Yes.
Director Turner.
Yes.
Director Vree.
Yes.
Thank you, Stella. Does anyone have any other business that we should take up before we adjourn? If not, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Second?
May I have a roll call, please?
Director Listner.
Yes.
Director Miller.
Yes.
Director Mulvaney.
Yes.
Director Thomas.
Yes.
Director Turner.
Yes.
Director Vree.
Yes.
Excellent. May I have a roll call of the trustees, please, for our village board meeting?
Trustee Listner. Here. Trustee Miller.
Here.
Trustee Mulvaney.
Here.
Trustee Thomas.
Here.
Trustee Turner.
Here.
Trustee Vree.
Here.
Okay. Our first order of business is the approval of the minutes of the meeting of December 20th, 2018, our regular meeting. We did not have a committee of the whole that night. The only thing on the minutes that I noted was that after that meeting, we determined, so it wasn't reflected in the minutes, that our next committee of the whole meeting would be January 10th, and we did, in fact, have one on January 10th to discuss Tudor Court. but the minutes are accurate because we hadn't said it at the time of the minutes. Does anybody have anything else on the minutes? May I have a motion to approve?
Second?
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Listener. Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney.
Yes.
Trustee Thomas.
Yes.
Trustee Turner.
Yes.
Trustee Vree.
Yes.
Is there anyone in the public that wishes to address the board on a subject not on our regular agenda? Okay, if not, let me start by reporting on the Committee of the Whole meeting on January 10th. The board looked at the various different options for improving Tudor Court and their relationship to the current buildings on it, and sent staff to put together a more detailed plan so that will come back to the board for us then to approve the basic changes, including the potential of closing Glencoe Drive so the Tudor Court will be a single drive without having Glencoe Drive involved with it. And then this evening's Committee of the Whole that we just concluded was looking at the question of what to do going forward with building permit fees and how that relates to whether we should have fees that include the size of basements, given the modern houses in Glencoe have basements that are really a part of the total living space of the house, and also what changes we should make in the fees that we do charge in order to cover costs, etc. So that's what we did in the Committee of the Whole, and the staff will look at the things that the board suggests they look at, and that will come back to us for further consideration in our March meeting. There was no Finance Committee meeting this month, so I won't ask Trustee Vree to report on the meeting that we didn't have. And that brings us to our Plan Commission. Trustee Miller, could you tell us?
And I also can't report on a meeting that the Plan Commission did not have.
Okay, so
we'll pass.
we're in great shape. We've gotten through those quickly. Is there anything in addition to the budget that you would like to add on the meeting of the Golf Advisory Committee?
Not much. Obviously, Stella explained not only what we reviewed and approved in our last meeting, but as usual did a sterling job in presenting what the directors needed to hear. I think one thing, though, that is worth mentioning is Stella and the golf club staff met with the Park District staff and to try to agree to implement a number of collaborative efforts to promote both facilities. And for example, in the upcoming Park District Guide, there will be some pages devoted to promoting the golf course and its summer camps and group lessons and so forth. And I think that kind of collaboration really is to be encouraged and is a very positive step. The only other thing is showing the creativity. Staff created an e-gift card, which proved to be useful for a number of people in purchasing e-gifts from the golf club in December. And it just, I think, goes to show again that the way in which the staff approaches these matters is positive and creative. And that's it.
Okay, thank you. The next order of business is the Sustainability Task Force, and my understanding is that Hall Healy, our chairman, is going to make a presentation about what they've been doing. Should I go to Hall first?
That would be fine. The only comments I wanted to make was just offer my thanks to the Sustainability Task Force, the work that they've done, the commitment they've had to date. It has been very impressive, and I know every month I report about us becoming the most desirable and sustainable community in the universe, and they are making progress towards that every day. So I just want to say thanks for that, and also thanks, Stella. I think that collaboration with the Park District that you've initiated is great, and I'd love to see more of that. One of the objectives of our Sustainability Task Force is to bring people together, including our various fractions of government. So that's right in line with the intent of sustainability. And so I will, with that, let Hal take it away, and he'll give a summary.
And I want to thank Hal for sustaining my trustee, Mr. Mulvaney. You keep him very happy and do lots of good work for him.
Well, he just mentioned a goal tonight that I wasn't aware of. I thought our goal was to make us the most desirable community in the United States, not the universe. So we have something to work on. Thank you very much. I have 4 to 7 minutes to give you a summary of what we've been doing. I want to first of all thank you for your ongoing support for our efforts to become the most desirable community in the universe. One of the most exciting things I think we've done this last year is to have a transportation study done, which took the bulk of the year. And thanks to your support for that, along with the Park District and the school district, we were able to pay for that. And we now have received, a little late for the budgeting process for the village, but we've received a very solid report recommending various things in terms of sidewalks, crosswalks, and roads to make things safer for pedestrians, bikers, and automobile drivers in the village. One of the things that really popped out, and I wasn't even aware of this, thanks to Larry Riley and to Elizabeth Schimmelpenninck. Several weeks ago, they took the results of your work, the budget, and line by line went through and looked for opportunities that within this year's budget, even though these things hadn't been planned for, to try to do some things according to the recommendations of the study. Obviously, we will work with staff because to find out what is practical, feasible for this year. But that we hope in each of the 3 areas on a priority basis to be able to do something to kick this study off. Very solid recommendations to make things again safer for all of us, more enjoyable. And it was due to Larry and Elizabeth that they actually went through and did this. So I want to commend their efforts along with the whole task force. The next thing I think is really exciting is that we put together a ravine alliance last year of people on Longwood to assess what the issues were with their ravine. And we said that in a meeting with them, and we'd also met with Dave and others, to talk about how would we go about this. And we talked about their paying for this initial assessment, along with other things down the road to actually repair the damage. Well, Lake County Stormwater Management District came along and said, we'd like to offer Glencoe a free study of all of your ravines. So this is really kickstarting not just the Ravine Alliance, but looking at all the ravines throughout Glencoe. It's a tremendous step forward for that initiative. A third one is composting, and thanks to Fred Miller, Barbara, for his initiative, looking at how can the village and the community garden work together, particularly over the winter, when the hauler, LRS, is not hauling compost, food scraps. Looking at how could we get this done for not only residents, but the businesses in town, Guildhall and the others. I went along with Fred for the ride to take pictures, where he actually picked up the compost from Guildhall, took it to the garden. And now we have a situation where the village, thank you, Phil, has agreed to buy some bins and put them in a public place where not only residents but the businesses can put food scraps, and then they'll be hauled on a regular basis to the garden. So thank you very much for your support on that. Lastly, as a focus point, I'd like to say we now have 2 students who are members, representatives on the task force from Central School, and I think that will add a lot. Stephen Covey had something to say about having a young person on your board of directors to, well, I won't use the word, but to provide some common sense from a kid's point of view about what we should be doing. So Obviously, there are limits, but they are enthusiastic. They've been participating for the last couple of meetings, so we're looking forward to their participation. We have lots of other things going on too, which are in the report. One of them is recycling. We've worked with the LRS to provide guidelines to each resident on what should go and what should not go in the bins. So again, I want to thank you for your support to make this thing possible. Perhaps down the road, this year we will be ending our 3-year term that you have given us. So there may be some changes in people, but we want to keep this sustained, that we want to keep the momentum going. So thank you very much.
I want to especially thank you for your leadership and tell you that I think you've done a tremendous job, so I'm very pleased.
Thank you very much.
I have a question. So how do you think we are doing in terms of carrying out some of the initiatives that you guys have come up with? For instance, the transportation plan, we've talked a lot about it. You know, how do we make sure we're doing the next steps and actually doing things? And are you guys paying attention to that? Do you have feedback for us as far as what we're doing?
To be honest, we weren't sure what our role would be once the study came along. But I think we now have one, thanks to Elizabeth and Larry. We've looked at where can the budget take on some of these things this year. Next year it'll be a more formal process, but at least we can kick it off this year. I think the village has been very responsive. The staff has been very responsive in terms of getting these things done. And Adam, as a staff liaison for us, has been doing a tremendous job. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because I just say from a personal perspective, I want feedback from you guys as far as are we carrying out some of those things that you want done or that are your recommendations, and just a report card or whatever you want to call it for us.
Well, one way you've shown support was Adam, how many $1,000 did the village supply for the ATP study? 8,000. So that was one element of your support. So I'd say yes. And in this year's budget is more funding for our work. One other element I did want to mention was that we've been working on public awareness as part of all of our efforts. And you may have seen these articles appearing monthly on a regular basis in the Glencoe Anchor. There's also material information on the website. So, any other questions?
On behalf of our board, we would like to ask you to thank all of your members for their hard work and their excellent contribution this past year.
Well, we've got 3 members here tonight, so we will all carry the message. Thank you very much.
The last thing I'd like to say is that, and I know we've talked about this a little bit in our meetings, it's not only the sort of projects that you see, these obvious actions like a plan or the implementation of the plan. I think the presence of the task force has probably the more influential or more important component of it is simply the awareness building, putting it in our consciousness and the decision making. And I think subtly it affects many of our decisions, even though it's not a direct discussion or outcome of the task force. So to me anyhow, these projects I think are very important and they're tangible, but those less tangible things that are occurring as a result of having the task force and the activities of the task force has a much broader influence than this list of 7 that we usually report out on every month.
One small piece of evidence on that is that the sesquicentennial, we've talked with Karen about including sustainable activities in their events throughout this year. And we did some of that at the Christmas tree lighting, at the tree lighting just before the holidays. Thank you.
Any other comments? Thank you. Speaking of the sesquicentennial and the tree lighting, Trustee Listener, do you want to tell us what's been going on in the past month?
Sure. So that was a perfect segue into the sesquicentennial. So it's 2019. This is our big year, the 150th anniversary for Glencoe. And as I know I've mentioned before, we've sent out calendars to all the households and businesses in the community, so showing all of the various events that are being held on a monthly basis. And there are certainly lots of activities that are being sponsored by the various community organizations in Glencoe. That calendar is also available online. Big event that's coming up is actually next week at Skokie Country Club, and so that is Saturday night, January 26th. It's the Glencoe 150 Hall of Fame dinner, where 150 Glencoians, as they now call them, I guess I didn't know that term before, past and present residents, people who've worked in Glencoe, had some sort of impact either in Glencoe, in the community, in the nation as a whole, are being honored for their contribution. And it's certainly going to be a very special event, and so if you're interested in going to that, it's being sponsored by the Glencoe Historical Society, and information about that event is on both the Village and the Glencoe Historical Society's website. But basically every month there are activities. We do meet on a monthly basis as a committee, and there are going to be a lot more activities as we go, but this is the one I'd like to highlight today. So I think that concludes my report.
Thank you, Gail. Trustee Turner, you want to report on what's been going on with the Historic Preservation Commission?
I'd love to, Larry. Thank you very much. January 8th was the last Historic Preservation Commission meeting. On Tuesday, the Commission held 2 public hearings for the consideration of both 1801 Green Bay Road, commonly known as the Hoover Estate, and 271 Hawthorne Avenue, both for honorary landmarks. The Commission recommended both properties for landmark status. There were representatives from the Hoover Estate at the meeting, so the Commission discussed with them some of the different thoughts that the representatives had, including the architect for the owners. And 271 Hawthorne was brought to the Commission by the existing owners who'd done a tremendous job researching in depth the history of their home, and were very proud of that and wanted to bring it to the Commission for consideration. As the board will know, the Village Board must formally adopt both of these, or must assess each of these properties individually and adopt them before they are considered actual landmarks. We anticipate that would happen at the March 21 Village Board meeting. In addition to that, the Commission reviewed some strategies to potentially prevent teardown. They range from evaluation of land trusts through to real estate riders. My notes just disappeared, sorry. And lastly, the Commission reviewed and approved a variety of residential properties for addition to the Historic Architectural Survey. The next meeting, which is of course open to the public, Tuesday, February 5 at 7:30 p.m.
Any questions? May I have the village manager's report? Oh, okay.
Well, maybe expand on that. Help me understand what you've added to the survey.
Sure. So the Village Board may remember a presentation by the Commission to the Village Board which outlined a series of residential properties that had been identified as historically significant. As part of that presentation, there was a website where you can see the map. It's all online and available. Since that initial survey, additional properties had been identified as historically significant. Those were reviewed by the Commission, and some of them approved to be added as historically significant properties. I'm not sure that they've made it quite to the map yet, because the meeting was just on the 8th of January, but I think the intention over time would be that they would make it over there.
Thank you. May I have the village manager's report, please?
Certainly, Mr. President. I have a relatively brief report this evening. I did want to report out relative to the village's actuary services. Over the past several months, staff has undertaken a review of those actuary services for both our police and fire pension funds. As was discussed with the Finance Committee on September 20th, it was determined that it would be appropriate to complete a competitive process to select a new actuary. Consequently, a request for proposals was issued in October. 4 proposals were received, and the Finance Department staff evaluated the top 2 proposals. While this is a contract that falls within the village manager's authority to enter into, I wanted to be sure to advise the board on this, simply because there is a great deal of information that comes from our actuary. The recommendation is that we enter into a contract with Foster & Foster. Foster & Foster has indicated that they plan to dedicate a series of qualified actuaries to the Glencoe account and have developed a modeling tool which will assist the village and pension board in decision making. They are well known in the public sector. They have over 350 public sector clients, including both fire and police funds in a number of municipalities, many of which are neighboring communities. These municipalities include Evanston, Lake Forest, Wilmette, and Winnetka, as well as the police pension funds in Kenilworth, Lincolnshire, LaGrange, and Glenview. So we will be entering into this contract. This is something that will impact future actuary reports and will come into play in our upcoming fiscal year. So I wanted to be sure to advise of that, and it again is something that we talked at some length with the Finance Committee back in September, but I just wanted to complete the loop on that. A couple of other relatively brief items. We do have our quarterly Business Before Hours event coming up Tuesday, January 29th, about a week and a half from now. This is the first event in 2019. As you'll recall, this is staff's opportunity to, on a regular basis, engage with our business community on a series of topics. This month, the presentation and discussion will be related to the village's Sustainable Business Recognition Program, so glad to be able to throw a pitch out to the Sustainability Task Force on that program. They will be present to outline that program and just talk a bit about it. As usual, we will be inviting all of our businesses here in the community, and we are, as always, hoping for a good turnout. One thing that we're going to try to do a little differently this year is to get all of the 2019 dates out shortly so that we can allow for those events to get into our business community's calendars. They can begin to plan for them. Even if we're not able to finalize the agendas, the dates, we want to make sure that those dates are in their calendars and they can attend. And then finally, last but not least, we do have a Coffee with the Boards coming up in a couple of weeks, again on Saturday, February 2nd from 10 a.m. to noon at the library. There will be representatives of the village board. I believe trustees Vree and Mulvaney will be there, as well as representatives from the library board, park district board, and school board. Just encourage the community to participate in that event. It's actually a really nice opportunity to talk to our elected officials in the community as well as some of the staff, ask questions, dialogue about issues in town. The last few events I think have been a little bit complicated because they've been in crowded places. We're hoping that the library as a venue will actually open up some better opportunity for discussion, perhaps make the group a little bit less scary to approach. It's a rather large group, and so sometimes people may not be interested in trying to find the person that they want to talk to. But we will be continuing these programs, the Coffee with the Board, through 2019. We'll be getting that calendar out shortly as well. So again, February 2nd at the library from 10 a.m. to noon. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Sorry, question about coffee with the board. We do get some feedback, some lengthy discussions. I'm curious what the process has been to carry that back to staff. I'm not certainly passing over my notes to anyone. I don't know quite how we're handling that, and just curious if there is a process, if we need to create one, or if things are working just fine.
One of the values of having staff attend in addition to elected officials is that some of that dialogue is happening simultaneously between staff and the boards, representatives of those boards. In many cases, and we talked through a couple of issues that really focused in particular with the village and the Park District. Both myself and Lisa Shepard were able to dialogue on that particular issue, which was relative to some standing water in some village and Park District properties, and talking through some of those things. We've done some outreach. So as those individual issues get brought up in those discussions, I know when there are village staff that are present, we try to dialogue with the elected officials and make sure that we've gotten the same information and that we can carry that back to whatever department may need to address something. In many cases, it's more of a philosophical discussion as opposed to a one-off singular issue. And some of those have made their way to broader discussions or have been integrated into other discussions that are already underway. So what we try to do at the staff level is to make sure that if there's a loop that needs to be closed with respect to an issue that a resident brings up, that we do that, and then if there are questions that are broader, that we make sure that those get circulated to the board. And I'm pretty sure that's how all of the other staff are handling it as well at the other governing bodies.
Any other questions? And I might mention on occasion, when I haven't been at the coffees, I've had trustees who've had discussions talk to me, and then in the staff meetings that I have with Phil, et cetera, that gets brought up and put into the mix of information and things to look at. And certainly when we've had coffee with the board where I've talked to people, which a lot of people do come and talk, I always go through all that with Phil and the staff so that anything that relates to things that we're doing or needs to have more thought on is processed as part of the whole staff work. So that's the norm. Any other questions? All right, the President's report. I want to invite the board. The Northwest Municipal Conference is having its legislative brunch a week from this Saturday on January 26th at 10 a.m. And I wanted to invite the board, anyone in the board that would like to attend that brunch, where our local legislators come and have brunch with us, and the Northwest Municipal Conference discusses with them our legislative program for the coming year and the things that we have interest in, and hear what they're looking at and thinking about. So again, anyone on the board, let Phil or I know if you would like to attend that brunch from 10 till noon on Saturday, January 26th, and we will put a reservation in for you at our table.
If you could let us know, perhaps by the end of the day tomorrow. I think the RSVP deadline is Monday, so let us know.
All right. In addition, I wanted to just again announce, and both publicly and remind the board, that our February board meetings, including the Finance Committee, the Committee of the Whole, and the board meeting, have been canceled, so that our next regular board meeting will be on March 25th, 2019. Any questions?
March 21st.
I meant March 25th. You're correct. March 25th is my birthday, so when I think of March, I think of that. March 21st. All right. The next order of business is our consent agenda. Does anybody have any questions of anything on the consent agenda? If not, may I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Trustee Listner. Yes. Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney. Yes. Trustee Thomas. Yes. Trustee Turner.
Yes.
Trustee Vree.
Yes.
All right. Our next order of business is consideration of a supplemental appropriations ordinance and corresponding budget amendment for fiscal year 2019, beginning March 1st, 2018, and ending February 28th, 2019. And Nikki Larson, our finance director, will explain what those two changes to our last year budget that we're going to implement in this year are and why we're doing it.
All right, well, thank you very much. Okay, I think we're ready to move forward. All right, so each year, as the board's aware, the village is required to pass an annual appropriations ordinance that sets our official legal authority to expend municipal funds. As we continue with our operations throughout the year, unfortunately, there are always unforeseen circumstances that we encounter, whether it is with project expenditures and operating expenditures that we need to adjust for. In order to allow this to happen, the village is required to pass what we refer to as the supplemental appropriation ordinance, which essentially trues up the year and takes a look at where we need additional resources and where additional resources may be available to transfer throughout the budget. Let's see. We also adopt an annual budget in addition to the appropriations ordinance. This doesn't necessarily set our legal expenditure authority, but it does enhance the transparency of where our expenditures are accounted for. This is a more detailed line-by-line expenditure plan that's passed as a result of many discussions. And this will be the first year that we are incorporating a budget amendment, which is more of a line-by-line detail, into the supplemental appropriations ordinance. We're doing this to enhance the transparency and the accuracy of what we are displaying to our residents, of how we are spending our money. The good news is all of the allocations that are proposed this evening, with one exception, have funds that are available to cover any overages and expenditures. The only exception is in the bond construction fund in the amount of $180,000. There are additional expenditures that we anticipate occurring this year that were not anticipated at the time of the budget adoption. Much of that is due to the favorable weather we've had. In December, it's been very warm. So we are asking for an additional appropriation in that dollar amount, but that is going to come from fund reserves in the bond construction fund that are left over from the 2016 bond issue. So although we're increasing expenditures in that fund, once again, there are funds available to cover that. Are there any questions on this process or any of the changes that are proposed?
If there are no questions, may I have a motion to approve the ordinance?
Second the motion?
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Listner.
Yes.
Trustee Miller.
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney. Yes. Trustee Thomas.
Yes.
Trustee Turner.
Yes.
Trustee Vree.
Yes.
All right, our next order of business is a more complex one because it really involves three separate things. Actually four. One is a public hearing with respect to the budget, so we're talking about in terms of the agenda items B through E, all of which are components of the fiscal year 2020 budget. And I'm going to ask our finance director to do the presentation on the fiscal 2020 budget. And then I will open the public hearing on the budget. Following the public hearing, then we will vote on an omnibus vote. Oh, I'm in good shape today.
We've all been there.
Items B through E. So just to make it clear, besides the public hearing, we're going to have consideration of an ordinance making appropriations for corporate purposes of the Village of Glencoe for the fiscal year beginning March 1st, 2019, and ending February 28th, 2020. The next one is consideration of an ordinance adopting the annual budget of the Village of Glencoe for all corporate purposes for the fiscal year commencing March 1st, 2019, and ending February 28th, 2020. And then consideration of a resolution amending the comprehensive fee and fine schedule. And lastly, consideration of a resolution approving and authorizing fiscal year 2020 expenditures for multi-year contracts. So with that mouthful of all those things, I will ask Nikki to give us a presentation that explains all that.
Before the finance director commences that, I'll wear my village clerk hat for a very brief moment and acknowledge a scrivener's error on my part, wherein the fiscal year actually ends February 29th, 2020. So there are 2 agenda items, and I just want to make sure that we have appropriations for that last day of the fiscal year.
It's not only a leap year, but we've leaped right into it.
That's right. That's right.
Nikki?
Thank you very much. Okay, so starting with the first, we're going to start out of the 4 items. We'll start with the biggest picture first, and then we'll get down to the detail.
I should add, I don't want to build a bridge, so we don't have to hold one day hostage, thanks to the
Appreciate that.
Scrivener's correction.
Thank you. The staff thanks you as well. So starting with the first item in the omnibus set, the first item for consideration is the fiscal year 2020 appropriations ordinance. Once again, this is required by Illinois compiled statutes. This sets forth the village's legal spending authority as approved by this board for the coming fiscal year. And it also extends to not only the village's operating funds, but also the village's pension funds and the public library as well. The breakdown is on the slide in front of you, and then it's also included in the packet. This is based on the fiscal year 2020 budget, which is, once again, that's more in detail, line by line, plus an additional 10% just to allow for that expenditure. And overall, including all of the village's operating funds, the pension funds, which again are, statutorily controlled. We have very little control over those. Locally, and the library fund. The grand total is $37,034,122. And moving on to the second item.
A quick question. That includes capital or not capital budget, or is that independent of this?
That includes capital.
Right.
That includes everything we're spending. So thank you. That was a good question. Okay. The second item in this subset for consideration is the fiscal year 2020 budget ordinance. The budget ordinance is the result of a 6-month-long extensive review of proposed expenditures, including several meetings that happened, public meetings that happened in November and December. There are 2 items to note here, starting with the operating funds. All of the village's operating funds include proposed expenditures of just over $24 million in revenue and $25 million in expenditures. And to Trustee Mulvaney's point, this does include a significant capital investment. On its surface, it does appear that the expenditures are larger than the revenues. However, when you do dig into the detail line item of the operating budget, our operating revenues are more than covering the operating expenditures. So in accordance with financial policies that the board has set and the Finance Committee has opined on, we've made an election to spend one-time reserves on capital expenditures that are in accordance with the community's improvement program. Those approximately $1.6 million in the general fund. So that is drawing down that surplus, and that is a purposeful expenditure of municipal funds that is within our financial policies. These figures also include the Tudor Court estimate. It's a placeholder that was determined by the Committee of the Whole in January, and that does increase these numbers a little bit by $1.2 million. And when you look at the budget from last year in 2019 compared to this year, if you exclude Tudor Court, we're actually decreasing our operating budget. And that excludes capital, but that does kind of mirror the direction from this board that we are really taking a hard look at the expenditures as they are proposed in the budget. The property tax levy that is included in this budget is an overall request. The request is decreasing. We did take a look at the operating levy and recommended to this board that we adjust it in accordance with CPI, but because we are paying debt off this year, that overall levy request is expected to go down. When you look at the total budget ordinance, including the pension funds and the agency fund in Washington Place, the expenditures go to 27 in revenue and 28.9 in expenditures. And once again, these are statutorily controlled, so there is very little that we can do about these two. And the 10-year community improvement program is also included with the budget document. That's a total of $47 million with $2.6 million across all funds in the coming year. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Denise so she can go over the fee and fine schedule.
Thank you, Nikki. The fiscal year 2020 comprehensive fee and fine schedule, some of the proposed increases that are listed up there for you, a 9% increase in water rates. As we said, this is in accordance with the recommendations in the water rate analysis. A 7.1% increase in sewer rates to fund $3.7 million in scheduled infrastructure improvements within the next 10 years. An increase in the general collection service fee. This is based on service level. If you recall, in November, you approved the fee. This has commenced as of January 1st of this year. Also included is a $2 replacement fee for lost or misplaced vehicle licenses. In addition, an option to purchase a commemorative vehicle license for $100 to supplement the committee's fundraising efforts this year. And half of those proceeds from that license sold will be utilized for the festivities. Also, a $25 application fee for a temporary food permit application, a $750 permit for special events fireworks display, a $75 administrative fee for exterior property maintenance, and then lastly, the Plan Commission and Zoning Board filings. Staff is proposing granting the authority to increase the filing fee based on the complexity of the request and making sure that it does not exceed the $750 fee. And as you know, the building permit fee is underway, and following the feedback that was received this evening, that will be coming back to the board at the Committee of the Whole in March. The next item on the agenda for your consideration is the fiscal year 2020 expenditures for multi-year contracts. Pursuant to the municipal code and the purchasing policy that was adopted in December 2017, annually the list of routine multi-year contracts is presented for you for your review prior to the beginning of a fiscal year. While contracts exceeding $25,000 are approved by you when the contract is first executed, there are various contracts for services and supplies that span multiple fiscal years that do not return to you for approval. To enhance transparency, the contracts and vendors outlined in the exhibit before you have been previously approved and continue to provide routine services for a wide-ranging spectrum of village operations. When appropriate, these contracts may be renegotiated or rebid if it's determined that a new contract process will result in cost savings to the village. Any new contracts in the amount of $25,000 will continue to come to you for approval. So at this time, this concludes the presentation on the fiscal year 2020 budget, and Nikki and I are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions? One thing that I would like to just mention is clarification. Previously, when we talked about the fiscal 2020 budget, there was discussion that in terms of the tax rate, we, as usual, extended the tax rate to include the small amount under the state cap that we can increase each year. At the same time, we waived the collection of some of the taxes that would normally be collected to pay off various bonds, and the net result of that is that, in fact, the taxpayers of Glencoe will pay less property tax in this coming year than they paid in the prior year. And so in plain English and layman's terms. I just wanted to clarify that as part of this budget.
An important addition to that statement is to the village.
Yes. Unfortunately, the other governments in Glencoe did not do that. So tax bills will go up, but not because of the village. Our portion will go down, and that will make a little less of a burden of those other governments that have raised it. All righty.
President Levin, on that note, could you remind me why the library is rolled into the budget? I always get confused why that is.
That actually may be a question for legal counsel to answer.
If you'd like, President.
Please.
There are different forms of government, and in Glencoe, the library is technically a separate government and a governing body, but not a separate taxing district. And under Illinois law, the library's budget must be approved by and included within the village's budget.
So this point that we make about the other groups not following this trickery, is that on us as approver of their policy and taxes? Why did we not get them to do this?
Well, other groups, I don't know that you were talking about the library in that category, or President Levin was talking about the school districts and the county and other entities that are specific line items on a resident in Glencoe's tax bill.
They have a separate board, the library does, that sets what their tax is going to be. And so it just gets added on to our tax. We don't control their expenditures and what they do in that respect.
Right, but I thought you were just saying that we have some role here. I mean, they show up in our budget, so could we not extend this principle that you applied here for tax savings that the village has benefited from? Could the library have benefited from that? And if so, why would we not have passed that on?
We do pass it on to our taxpayers. They pay the bill for all governments because ours is lower.
Yeah.
No, different question.
It's a different, right.
Why didn't we advise the library to follow the same tax practice that we as the so-called village, in quotes, have followed?
I would just like to clarify one point, and I think Finance Director Larson made note of this. The village's tax levy was voted on at the December board meeting. The levy itself on a portion of the dollars that we levy was increased to the statutory limitation, 2.1%. Because of the retirement of the Series 2009 bonds that will finalize out in the current fiscal year, the overall decrease, there is an overall decrease in the amount of money that the village will actually levy between calendar year 2018 and calendar year 2019. So it is, while we did increase our overall levy, the increase is significantly mitigated by the retirement of debt. So it's an overall decrease in the number of dollars that are levied for the purposes of the village and its operations. It's other debt service costs as well as our property tax levy to fund operations. So that is a bit of a round-robin way to explain it, but I think that's probably the easiest way, and Nikki will probably do a better job than I. But
I don't think I'm going to, if I can just add to that. Essentially, all of these taxing agencies that we're talking about, everyone is subject to the property tax extension limitation. And that's set by the Department of Revenue. They say, you know, it's essentially tied to CPI. You cannot increase your levy more than a certain percentage. And the library does abide by that because legally they have to. Essentially, we're in a unique situation in the village that when we issue general obligation bond debt, we go out to referendum, the community approves that, and then that attaches a property tax levy to it. Because we have essentially a debt payment falling off, the overall amount that's going to be levied on behalf of the village is going to go down. And because the village library is not in the same situation, The only statutory limitation that they're subject to is just that CPI increase. So when you do look at the levy as an overall, including the library, it is going up, but it's offset by that debt that is coming off of the ledger. Now, in terms of asking them the question that you're asking, I think, is a different question, not necessarily statutorily. What can the library do? Could we ask them? That would probably be a question for this board. I answered that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think I get it.
She did, that last point was, I think, your first question of after you wanted to understand the different forms of government. And yes, you can ask them going forward to follow certain practices. They are, though, as Nikki indicated, subject to the same tax cap limit that the village is as a non-home rule government.
Sure.
And they're in a different situation. We, as a board, made a determination not to collect that extra tax and then spend it on things. And so we kept our expenses lower in order to remit that tax. And that permitted us, while preserving our right to tax in the future, that permitted us to actually reduce the total amount that we're asking the taxpayers to pay to fund the things that we as a village do. The library, what we would be asking, what you were asking about is, we're not, as a board, it is not our custom to say to them, gee, we don't like your budget and we think you should spend less money and take it away from it. We made our decision as to those things we control, and they made their decision as to what they control. Just as a matter of law, they get tacked onto us for what is the way in which it is treated for tax purposes.
Yeah, thanks for the explanation. I think I understand. It was simply I was reacting to what I thought you were alluding to, is that we as a village did something particularly clever and to save something, whereas the other governances didn't, and that's what triggered me. But it sounds like it was simply a scenario in which we could do something and others couldn't, and so we did it, and others didn't because our
bonds were retired.
And that's all.
That's a good summary.
And I was complimenting our board on determining not to increase expenditures to use that money, but to instead return it to our taxpayers. Any other questions? If not, may I have an omnibus?
We need to do the public hearing.
Oh, that's right, got to do the public hearing first. Forgot about that because we had such a good presentation, I didn't think about it. So I would like to open the public hearing and ask if there's anybody in the public that would like to address us with respect to the budget. If not, may I have a motion to close the public hearing?
I second.
May I have a roll call?
Trustee Lister?
Yes.
Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Thomas?
Yes.
Trustee Turner?
Yes.
Trustee Vree?
Yes.
And now, having actually had our public hearing, I'm in a position to ask for the omnibus motion to approve items B, C, D, and E on our agenda.
It's actually C, D, and E. B was the public hearing, so it's actually item C.
But there is an
D, and E.
ordinance that
There's an
attaches to
ordinance
the public
attached.
hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So it is item B, the ordinance which has to do
Stand
with the one
corrected.
making the appropriation for corporate purposes is item B.
Second?
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Listener? Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Thomas?
Yes.
Trustee Turner?
Yes.
Trustee Vree?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, our next item of business is consideration of a resolution approving modifications to the purchasing policy. And I will let Denise continue to stand up and enlighten us as to what that's about.
Thank you, President Levin. Based on a recent review of the approved purchasing policy that was approved in December 2017, proposed modifications were made to enhance transparency and generate efficiencies in the procurement process when longer periods of time occur between village board meetings. Specifically recommended is an update to the village's existing process that would grant the village manager discretion to approve and release checks for certain payments without prior board approval for amounts that fall within the manager's statutory authority, which is under $25,000. In certain circumstances, early checks are issued where a payment is made to avoid interest or late payment penalty, or a payment for a project already approved by the board, or in some reasons for a necessity or emergency. Staff is proposing all early checks be subject to approval by the village manager and be presented to the village board for ratification at the next scheduled meeting, separate from the check register that's on the agenda every month. Also, a proposed update includes an administrative invoice approval. This approval will only occur when there is a gap of 5 weeks or more between village board meetings. Staff is proposing that the village manager be authorized to approve and release individual payments under $25,000 in lieu of holding pending payments until the next scheduled village board meeting. This list will appear on the following board meeting agenda for ratification. Again, any payments exceeding $25,000 will not be released. If the modifications are approved this evening, a separate payment register for your consideration will be included on future board meeting agendas. Happy to answer any questions you may have regarding that.
If no questions, may I ask for a motion to approve?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Trustee Listener? Yes. Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Thomas? Yes. Trustee Turner?
Yes.
Trustee Vree?
Yes.
Okay, our next order of business is consideration of a resolution approving a professional services agreement for financial advisory services with Spear Financial, Inc.
Home
Nikki?
stretch. Okay. The village uses a financial advisor to support its financing activities, primarily on the issuance or refunding of outstanding debt. This fall, the village learned that its existing provider was ceasing operations in Illinois, which prompted us to issue a request for proposals in November to solicit a new provider. The village received 5 proposals in total, and we are making a recommendation to this board to move forward with Spear Financial. I would like to recognize Mark Gerantina in the back of the room. He will be working on our account. Out of all of the firms that submitted proposals, Spear emerged very quickly as the most active financial advisor in Illinois. In 2017, they advised on 208 municipal bond sales, totaling over $1 billion. And the team has a combined 50 years of technical experience and expertise. So if approved, we would move forward with a contract to provide these services. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Any questions? If not, may I have a motion, please?
Second?
Roll call, please.
Trustee Listener? Yes. Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Thomas? Yes. Trustee Turner?
Yes.
Trustee Vree?
Yes.
Okay, we look forward to working with them. Next order of business is consideration of an ordinance with respect to disconnecting a certain territory from the village of Glencoe, subject to annexation to the village of Winnetka pursuant to section 7.124 of the Illinois Municipal Code. And this is referring to 1311 Scott Avenue, which is on the border between Winnetka and Glencoe. Dave, could you enlighten us as to what that's about?
Absolutely. Very, very briefly, earlier last year, the owners of 1311 Scott Avenue and Winnetka had preliminary discussion with staff in both respective communities regarding their interest in the process for disconnecting their property from the village of Glencoe and annexing to the village of Winnetka. 1311 Scott Avenue is one of 12 lots on Scott Avenue that exist with a split lot condition, wherein the front portion of the lot is located in Winnetka and the rear portion is located in Glencoe. In December, the board may remember that both the villages of Glencoe and Winnetka entered into an intergovernmental agreement pertaining to the 12 split lots that remain on Scott Avenue and setting forth the terms and conditions for their individual disconnection from Glencoe and annexation to Winnetka at such time that a petition for disconnection was filed. Under the terms of the IGA, Glencoe is entitled to escalating property tax reimbursement payments from the Village of Winnetka over a 5-year period in recognition of the disconnection of 1311 Scott from the Village of Winnetka. Pending action that the board will take tonight on this item, the Village of Winnetka plans to schedule an annexation and rezoning public hearing on the 5th of February 2019. So staff, in conclusion, staff has worked with the village attorney to review the documentation necessary for this process, and has confirmed that the petition for disconnection, the plat of exclusion, and disconnection ordinance are consistent with provisions of the Illinois Municipal Code and the IGA approved by the village board in December. Therefore, staff recommends the board approve the ordinance, disconnect certain territory from the Village of Glencoe subject to annexation to the Village of Winnetka pursuant to provisions of the Illinois Municipal Code for the property located at 1311 Scott Avenue, Winnetka. With that, we would entertain a motion and any questions to council.
I think last time we talked about checking to see if that was happens to be a historically significant house.
I don't recall that we have any additional information on that.
I don't believe so.
No.
And before we pass on to actually acting on this, our council wanted to remind the board that he not only represents the Village of Glencoe, but also the Village of Winnetka.
Right. It's important that I make that disclosure. I think you all know that. We have, with disclosures to both municipalities, been working with the staffs merely to document the agreement that was passed back in December between the two staffs and to facilitate any discussion between the two staffs of the two villages.
Any other questions? If not, may I have a motion, please?
Second?
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Listener? Yes. Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Thomas? Yes. Trustee Turner?
Yes.
Trustee Vree?
Yes.
Okay. Is there any other business that anyone wishes to bring up before we move to the motion on a closed session? If not, I would request a motion to move into closed session for the purpose of discussing the following under the Illinois Open Meetings Act. Section 2C21, approval of closed session minutes, and Section 2C1, discussion of performance and compensation of an employee. May I have a motion, please?
Second?
May I have a roll call, please?
Trustee Listener? Yes. Trustee Miller?
Yes.
Trustee Mulvaney?
Yes.
Trustee Thomas? Yes. Trustee Turner?
Yes.
Trustee Vree?
Yes.